Hi, Patreon peoples.
Hi, patrons.
Welcome.
Yes, patrons.
That was good.
Welcome.
Okay. We're talking about conspiracies and conspiracy theories.
Yes, we are. I'm so excited about it. Like in the way that is like, I'm excited to talk about it, and because I like and I'm interested in conspiracy theories. But like you said, this makes me a little bit sad.
Yeah, it's a little bit terrible, and I feel like it came together though. I'm eager to spill it. And I think I even realize now there's more sources I wanted to tap into, but this is already so long that I think I'm good with this. And if there's things I missed, hopefully people let us know.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
But man, one of the things I have this secret wish that at least one person who is even leaning toward conspiracy theories hears that, and they're like, oh yep, that's me, oh yep, that's me, oh yep, that's me, god damn it, what am I doing with my life?
Yeah,
um
yeah. Hopefully,
because I
hopefully we
mean
have the Joe Rogan power.
I mean god, there's just all of the stuff that's like involved in this. I'm like, every piece of this we can easily sort of take it apart and just like examine it and be like, oh yeah, this is still crap.
Yeah.
Like, want to know how I know this is crap is because I can predict the crap that it will produce, and it does produce that crap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because I and we'll probably talk about it on the show, but I remember when that documentary came out that talked about the moon landing being fake on like Fox or something when we were kids, and like being like, what? But I was like also a child. So
Yeah.
it's like it's very easy to sway a child, and then you just kind of like you're talking to adults that are like, okay, but Pizzagate, and you're like the stretch, the mental gymnastics that you have to go through to make that work, like it doesn't even make any sense.
Well, I wonder about things, and I talk about this a little bit later on, but there are these people who believe that simultaneously that the January 6th insurrection didn't happen, or like was just
Uh-huh.
a peaceful tourists walking around taking pictures, like on a guided tour or something.
Right.
And that it did happen, but it was conducted solely by Antifa and other. It was like a false flag operation, other
Mm-hmm.
extremists. And so I'm like, how? To me, I'm like, those are opposite. You can't believe both of those at the same time.
Yeah.
But and they
Yeah, it's
spout that
weird.
shit on Fox. Like on Fox, they'll do the like, this was Antifa and this was orchestrated and this wasn't a big deal. These were just patriots who were like upset. And like you just can't have it both ways. And I don't understand how a fucking news network or supposed news network gets away with that.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. But I feel like when you look at conspiracies, like looking at the media that's producing it is like also like, we kind of always talk about like following the money, and it's like, well, they're gonna make more money by having viewers and inciting that kind of thing. Like they don't give a shit what they're saying. Like I think that maybe Tucker Carlson believes some of that stuff, and maybe some of the people that are like newscasters on there, but I don't think that for the most part they really believe any of that. They're just like, they just have they know their base, which is people that can't can't put together a little bit of yarn across two ideas.
It's it That's true, and I've wondered that as I'm like, I feel like if you were to corner them, like they would be like, oh yeah, no, it's just my job to spout this. I'm like, at what point do you feel like this isn't like a good job to have anymore?
Well,
I don't know.
they don't have the moral compass, like I mean that's just what it is. Like, there's plenty of people that like do the job and they just don't care of the impact. Like it's very much so like when you read the Dark Tower and they talk about the breakers, right? The breakers are the people, they were the psychics that were like breaking the beam, and they just didn't give a shit. They're like, yeah, it's like they know what they're doing. They don't care what they're doing. Like they know that they're bringing about the end of the universe, but they're just kind of like sociopaths.
Yeah,
It's just like whatever,
yeah.
you know. So, except for Shimi. Shimi was not a sociopath. Shimi was a goddamn angel.
I should reread those books.
You really should. I read them I reread them a few years ago, and I was like, man, what an impactful thing. I told you I've been reading Animorphs, dude. It is sad. It is dark. Like literally, the one book was like the Rachel was in a bear morph and got her arm cut off. It was like she literally had her arm sawed off in another book. Like it is violent.
Thanks.
It's depressing.
Fun.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, I have a couple quick tidbits to share with you. One is that, for some reason, this week is the longest sustained number of days with like a high rate of downloads for the podcast that we've had in a long time. So like our launch date was not that high, but then every day after like was a lot higher than most subsequent days are. Like usually Wednesday it's like all the plays, and after that it tapers off really fast, and then like by Sunday it's like next to nothing. Monday, Tuesday will climb up just a little bit, but then Wednesday hits, it's like boom, and then it tapers off again, which is understandable. Like that makes a lot of sense now. But yeah, this week it was like it came down just a little bit and just like stayed kind of high for several days. So
that's interesting.
Yeah. So there's that. The other one was so I had this one site reach out to us about like pushing their content on our website, and then they would like push they would like share our episodes on their social media. It was like sort of a handshake agreement that we had. And because like I looked into their stuff, and they seem to do this educational material that for the most part looks pretty legit and on the up and up and all that. And so I was like, man, I don't mind. I was like, we've gotten so many inquiries about people wanting to like us to promote their shit. And that I'm like, I feel like what I want to do is just create a section of the website that just says promoted content. And essentially people would pay money and would get their stuff up there for a certain amount of time. And so I decided, what I really should do is write some policies around this. And so I started creating the Context Media Policy Handbook for all things related. And it just started with the promoted content section. I came up with a few price points, like a fee structure for it. And then like, here's sort of the contract of like things that like how to go about submitting this, and like how long, you have to, if we review it and we find issues, then we're going to like request those changes. If those don't happen, you're going to read back through the submission process again. And like if at any point your promoted content is in like we have to approve it in the first place, but if at any point it becomes in violation of our rules and policies, then we're going to pull it. And so most of it was pretty straightforward. It was like everyone on the team has, or I call the administrative staff has to approve it. Can't contain hate speech, sexual exploitative content, promote violence, etc. Like basic sort of boilerplate stuff. But I also went hard after like things like also can't push like pseudoscience or things that like contradicts current scientific consensus. And then I went in and I decided I'm just going to make a list of people who under no circumstances will I ever allow them to promote any content. I'm like, not that they would ever just know or see this, but I feel good putting it there. And I'm just going to read through the list. Donald J. Trump and all affiliates and family. Tucker Carlson, David Duke, Rudy Giuliani, Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lindsey Graham, Robert F. Kennedy, Mitch McConnell, Ron DeSantis, Greg Abbott, Ron Johnson, Ted fucking Cruz, or any member or affiliate of a known hate group or terrorist organization.
I love that.
I was like going hard after the Republicans.
Good.
Yeah.
I like that. I mean, I like that. I like that a whole lot.
Yeah, but I was like, I couldn't just write Ted Cruz. It had to be Ted fucking Cruz.
Yeah, because that's the kind of person he is.
Yeah. And I think it does speak volumes, at least to me, that David Duke is on the same list as all these people.
Oh man, yeah, it's weird. It's weird to think that like David Duke is a person that's still around.
I know
he hasn't been like taken out, but like here we are, Oh man,
he's been on for so long, and he just keeps being a piece of shit.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine sustaining that level of shitdom for that long.
It seems exhausting.
Seems like I guess maybe it does. It's not exhausting given that like people just don't have that, like we said, like that moral compass,
Yeah.
All
Um,
right. He's the worst. They're all the worst.
Yeah, they're terrible. But I feel like I need to turn this into like a signed document thing with the people. But I'm gonna create that section on the website. It'll be fun. All right. So I'm gonna go through our new checklist really quick. If there's anything on the recording end. I mean, we've done this so many times. I feel like I don't really need to, but gonna do it. All right.
Do it.
So pulling up my card here for recording. Let me get to recording. All right. Read notes thoroughly and carefully before recording. Yes. Check this once
Done.
clear on topics. Yes. Independently review research. NA. Bullet point additional ideas. NA. Add recommendations. We've both done that. We'll record the episode, do ad breaks about every 15 minutes, and then upload the files, and then that will be it for this card.
Awesome.
Cool.
We did it.
We did it. We did a process.
I like new systems.
Yeah. Okay. Are you ready?
I am. Let me get set up. And yes, I'm ready.
Cool. All right. Let's kick us off in 3, 2, 1, record. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your lunatic fringe host, Abraham.
And I'm going to be your reptilian moon-based host, Shane.
We are a psychology podcast. We talk all the things about psychology, and it is good. And if you would like to support this show, you may do so by leaving us a rating and a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe, share this episode with a friend, that sort of thing. And if you've got a little extra cash and you're like, I want to support this podcast hardcore, well, you can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
You can go to patreon.com and join us there, and you'll get extra perks and benefits. You can also go to our merch store and walk away with some stuff in your hand. We've got mugs, stickers, a t-shirt, and we're just going to keep expanding that thing. So the next time you're doing some gift shopping, head over to a merch store. It's a place to get some good gifts.
Yeah.
Both for yourself and for others.
There's some good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some fun stuff there. And what's really nice and what's really fun is like we as a show and as a group of people, we design these things ourselves. So, we have a lot of fun putting this stuff together and making it for you all to share with the world.
Yeah. We're independent. We're small. We're fun. We're doing the thing.
DIY, baby.
That's right. And today we are going to tell 2 stories about some people, and we're going to sandwich a bunch of science between those 2 stories.
I think that's good. So our first story is about Jadeja. I would imagine.
I didn't look up a pronunciation. I was reading it as Jadeja, but
Jadeja. Okay, that's fine. So beep. So our first story is about Jadeja. And they are an Australian, but has spent a lot of time in the U.S. and was very interested in U.S. politics because, as he described it, quote, American politics, it's like a car crash you can't look away from, end quote.
Yeah, I support that. I
we agree with that sentiment.
Yeah,
we agree with that sentiment. Now, as opposed to Australian politics, which are, quote, boring. Honestly, I would take boring.
Yeah. Oh man, please bring me the boring politics.
Yes. Jatarth was a Bernie supporter during the 2016 election and was shocked with Trump winning. He had switched away from mainstream media and started listening to Shock Jock and man who has shown us the true horror of what really happens when a kissed toad magically becomes a human, Alex Jones. The worst. The mad ravings. The mad ravings of that deranged lunatic introduced Jatarth to QAnon and the conspiracy world, and the rapidly fell down.
Well, I guess, and then Jatarth,
introduced Jatarth to QAnon and the conspiracy world, and Jatarth rapidly fell down this rabbit hole, which is a pretty deep rabbit hole.
It is. And in case anyone listening is confused and doesn't know what we're talking about, QAnon is an American virtual conspiracy cult that, like the Joker, is out to cause harm to everyone everywhere.
Uh-huh.
However, however, the followers of QAnon don't see it that way. One of the features of this world of goons is that the community is as much a part of the appeal as the conspiracies themselves. There's no
Hmm.
leader, no structure, no rules, no concern whatsoever over facts, and a flagrant hatred of evidence of any kind, really, at least
That's
tangible,
true.
legitimate evidence. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah, or anything reasonable or logical or anything like that. So,
precisely.
as Jatarth describes, the cult thrives because there are these cryptic posts from Q. They're called Q drops, by the way,
Yeah.
that can be interpreted in any way. And people will post their theories, comment on each other's theories, and work together. And in these little pods, they'll build up a conspiracy theory and disseminate them wildly. It's like a game of whack-a-mole at lightning speed, and in which the moles can't be whacked because, as we mentioned, there's no disproving a conspiracy theory. So these moles don't actually exist.
Yeah, they're pretend lightning fast moles.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They're
Such a
actually
mixed
not even
metaphor.
moles. That's the problem. Yeah,
Right.
they're not even moles.
Yeah.
It's a whole
The
thing.
the metaphor spun out of control quickly.
Much like QAnon conspiracy theories.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The metaphor holds strong.
So it works.
Or the analogy, maybe. I don't. Word.
Yeah.
I'm getting mixed up now. Fortunately, there are some people with at least an iota of critical thinking, and they will eventually start to see the flaws in their beliefs, and can find their way out, as Jatarth has now. So, after 2 years of dedicated evangelizing for the QAnon movement, he sort of eventually climbed his way out of that world, and it will return to his story in just a bit.
Yeah, so believe it or not, we're not actually dissecting or even targeting QAnon specifically in this, but conspiracy theories more generally. So that's what we're going to be focusing on. We're going to be asking, what are conspiracy theories? Why people believe them? What's the harm of these conspiracy theories? Because at first it might seem fun and cute that birds aren't real, but it turns into a real problem at some point. And we're also speaking. We'll spend some time speaking to how we might try and do something about this moving forward, so we can prevent this kind of harmful spread of misinformation.
All right, let's get into it. First, it's always important to just unpack a definition of a conspiracy theory. And I looked up a few different sources in preparation for this to get an idea. And essentially, what it sort of always boils down to is that you have some small group of powerful people who are influencing events or covering up events. And so at the root of this, you're always going to have some kind of event that takes place, some event or situation, and that the conspiracy theory then posits that some small group of powerful people is actually carrying out that they're behind the event or situation, not and specifically that there is another explanation for that event or situation that's like
Mhm.
easy and plausible, but instead the conspiracy theory rejects the easy plausible hypothesis and instead again supposes that there's got to be this secret shadow group of people who are actually they're behind this, and they're deceiving the public and the people about that event.
Yeah, and it's really important to kind of to frame this, and the way that I always frame this is with the issue of the moon landing. So there are people out there that believe the moon landing is not real. So the amount of resources and effort to fake the moon landing and to protect that secret for decades and decades and decades makes very little sense compared to the fact that it might have been easier to land on the moon, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about thousands and thousands of people that worked on this project that are hiding the secret that we didn't land on the moon. That's the argument, right? That you've got NASA, a group of people, thousands of people that are lying for decades and never told anybody that the moon landing was faked, never shared the secrets, nothing that it's been kept secret for this many years. It just doesn't make any sense. So, when you look at like kind of a thing that we value, parsimony, simplest explanations here, when you look at this kind of Occam's razor thing, it doesn't make any sense. The logistics behind that makes no sense compared to what the truth is which we landed on the moon.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Is it's almost the opposite of a scientific sort of skeptical way of thinking. It's like
Yeah.
it's simple. You know, we see someone. I'm trying to think of a good example of. I mean, because you can just do it with virtually anything. Like your car runs low on oil. Simple explanation: you used a lot of oil, and you now need more. Conspiracy explanation is like secret magical wizards that are the size of mice are climbing into their engine and siphoning out oil for their honey production facility in the Antarctic. Like
Right.
honestly, it's like, you know, grab out random words and string them together in what sort of forms a cohesive sentence, and you've got the effectively reasonable, uh, I guess, analogy to a conspiracy theory, which is that like the simple explanation is the thing happened, and there's like a relatively straightforward cause for that happened. Alternatively, you could just go any number of directions with anything that's this unobservable, unverifiable, totally speculated thing that happened, that's like it was directed toward you to harm you. This group of magical beings or whatever they are out there to get you. And that's sort of the, we'll get into more talking about, you know, what's going on here psychologically, but part of the backbone of this is that sort of feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll see that, you know, sometimes when you ask the question, well, why, nobody can answer that. Now, let's talk about where this is going. There are plenty of silly examples of this, silly
Yeah,
frivolities,
qualities, you got it.
frivolities. Okay. Beep, silly frivolities, like things like the moon landing hoax, the myriad of different people who have now taken or been given credit for the trope of the JFK assassination, like the comedian Loki 5 from is it just UA?
Umbrella Academy.
Oh, okay. Beep. Number 5 from Umbrella Academy. The Earth is flat. The Earth is hollow. We live inside another hollow Earth. I love that one. That's my favorite one. Is that we like one of my favorite ones? That we are not living on a hollow Earth, but we are living inside a larger hollow Earth. That we are an Earth inside a larger Earth.
Sure.
You know, just there's all kinds of things, and sometimes they seem silly, and they seem kind of fun, but they can actually turn into some problems.
Yeah, they seem kind of harmless, and maybe this is just sort of a nostalgic way of thinking that that idolizes the past, to think of it that way. But the prevalence and threat of conspiracy theories has really surged to unprecedented levels in the last several years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a 2014 study out of the University of Chicago found that 50% of American people that they surveyed reported believing in at least one conspiracy theory. But then 4 years later, a follow-up saw that that number increased to 61%. So in 2018, 61% of Americans believed in at least one conspiracy theory.
And I'd be willing to bet that that has climbed significantly higher ever since the 2020 election.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that have happened around the pandemic. I can't even begin to imagine where that's gotten to now. And now this isn't limited to the United States. In a 2016 study out of Cambridge, that study found that 60% of British citizens also believed at least one conspiracy theory. And so this seems to be, at least among English speaking people right now, a relatively widespread phenomenon.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like in this case, these studies were looking at demonstrably false conspiracy theories. But one of the problems with understanding conspiracy theories is that some of them are true, right? So you have things like Watergate, MK Ultra, the Russian interference with the 2016 election, that the government pushed alcohol manufacturers to poison their alcohol during Prohibition to prevent people from turning into moonshine,
Turning it
into moonshine. All of these are examples of conspiracies that turned out to be true. And there's a link to more of these in the show notes, and we'll share those. But there are some kind of nuggets of truth within these. Now, you'll see that some of these, like MK Ultra, has blown up into something a little bit more fanatical. But there's nuggets of truth in these that are just enough to confirm that these theories existed.
Well, and yeah, so I think note that the fact that we know about those conspiracies, that these are known and heavily investigated, because real conspiracies don't really tend to last very long when there's a lot of people involved. Now, there might be a substantial number of conspiracies we don't know about that do involve a very tiny number of people. I'm talking real tiny, like 2.
Yeah.
There's no real way of knowing, possibly more, but it requires very, very few people. As the song "Secret" by the group Pierces features as a theme song for the TV show Pretty Little Liars suggests, quote, two can keep a secret if one of them is dead, end quote. And I know that's a saying
Hmm.
that's said elsewhere. But that's the
Yeah.
idea of like, it's really, really difficult to ensure that a secret will be kept if anybody, like, if every one person you add to that group of conspirators, like, exponentially increases the likelihood that that will be found out by somebody else, because people talk, you just
Yeah.
can't have that much control. And like, usually you have one sort of central figure, and then people in orbit around that figure who are the ones who aren't necessarily directly involved in like maintaining that conspiracy. Like,
Right.
sometimes they are, but oftentimes they're not. And so it just makes it increasingly difficult. And if they talk to each other, there's the risk of being overheard. Even if they're in code, there's a risk that it'll be found out. And so like, it's really, really challenging to maintain those. And so when conspiracies do exist, we tend to find out about them if they were large scale conspiracy theories.
Right. And that's where the facts kind of come out. So I mean, it's interesting though that some of these theories persist. So let's take a second to look at the two ways that we can understand conspiracy theories and really describe what might be going on. But first, before we do that, let's hear an ad from somebody who's trying to sell you something.
That was beautiful.
Ah, thanks. Anytime. I'm learning.
I was about to even suggest that, and you totally did it right on cue. Lovely.
That's it. Right on cue and on.
Right. Nice. All right, so we've been talking about these, just understanding conspiracies, sort of what they are, giving definitions and the prevalence. Now let's talk about ways of understanding conspiracies, sort of what's going on here. So there's sort of these two ways. One is the common human biases and tendencies involved in believing conspiracies, and the other is why we're susceptible to those biases and to those stories. And so let's start with unpacking the human biases that are involved in conspiratorial thinking.
Yeah. So, in order to understand this, we have to understand a concept called apophenia. Right? Did I say that right? Did I get
Yep,
that?
that's
All right.
good.
Good. All right. Apophenia. And this is identifying patterns from random, unconnected events or information similar to each other. So you'll start kind of like drawing the red lines and the red yarn to each other. And
Yeah.
you can also see illusory pattern perception. Now, this is really important, I think, because this is going to be kind of the main idea for understanding how people will take one event and they will inexplicably link it to another event somehow, and they have to that's when they start jumping through the hoops to get there.
Many of the psychological researchers who have spent a lot of time and maybe even based their careers on understanding conspiracies and conspiratorial thinking and that sort of thing, they seem to view apophenia as being one of the most central biases inherent to this thought process. And all of us have experienced this apophenia to some degree. Even if we see random sequences, they don't necessarily look random to us. An example that's a type of this is called pareidolia, and this is a type of visual pattern recognition. And as an example of this, we're really good at detecting faces. That's something that we're good. A lot of people, the neurology community, argue that this is something our brains are hardwired to do, is look for faces. And I think you could also describe the fact that when we're born, we immediately are surrounded by people's faces. We orient baby's face toward our face, and we are just, that is something we see so much that it dominates a large part of our existence.
So many faces.
Yeah, right out the mommy gate, and so beep. And so whenever we see things in nature that have essentially two holes that are like next to each other and then like a dot between them that's underneath, or something that looks like a hole underneath, we immediately see eyes and a nose, or eyes and a mouth, or some combination of those things, and we will see them anywhere, even if it's just random patterns. And again, if you flip that pattern upside down, people see nothing. But the moment that it appears in it at the right orientation, then they'll see a face. Doesn't matter if there's actually a face there. We're really, really good at detecting it, and that's the sort of visual pattern recognition.
Yeah, and but there's plenty of other examples like streaks in sports and gambling, right? That might be a good luck streak or something like that, and there's some pattern of behavior that's related to that. Two coincidental times that someone cuts you off in traffic is enough to evoke the thought that there is something about that location, or that those people are specifically out to get you. Sometimes only one event is enough. I mean, we see this kind of happen in all these different ways. Like we kind of like make connections to things that are not connected, and you might hear the term synchronicities.
Yeah.
And that's another way to look at that, is like when two events happen. I always make the joke, like in years that we have more Nick Cage movies, we seem to have more earthquakes. So it's like that's a synchronicity. That's a pattern that we're identifying, and you see that a lot in correlational research, where there's a lot of patterns that are identified that are actually not related to each other at all.
I'm curious if you have any stories about this specifically, but I've had the experience where I was like I was running late to something, and then there just happened to be this like massive car accident on the road, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
of course. I was like, it's like I'm on the Truman Show, and you guys are like, this is the day he's running late. This will be the time that we cause a car accident to absolutely ruin his life.
Uh-huh.
And so
Yeah.
like, even though I don't necessarily believe that, I can find it just one event. I see the pattern of you're out there to do this to me because of the coincidence that this happened right at the time that I most needed it to not happen. That sort of thing. Has
Yeah.
that ever happened to you?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. The one thing I think of is like, when I think about my superstitious behavior, like and I'm totally susceptible to it too. As a baseball player, like baseball players are the most superstitious people on the planet. If you all don't know that, like people who play sports regularly are
Yeah.
incredibly superstitious. And one thing that I used to do is, in seasons, in games, like when I would get hits and I would get on base and stuff, and I would start getting hitting streaks, I'd stop washing my socks.
Sure.
So like if I had hits during that game, I wouldn't wash my socks for the next game. So like I went like a whole season not washing my socks because I got hits in every single game, which is disgusting, absolutely disgusting. But it was a thing.
Oh no, we're frozen. Oh, Shane's whole system seems to have gone down. He's not even. Hey, I'm back.
Hi, welcome back.
I don't know. This is like
I
my
don't know
computer's
what
just
happened.
like, yeah. If you like your image froze, but the sound kept coming through for a minute, and then my computer's like, and you're done, and just like it was like you're no longer on the internet. Goodbye. I
Yeah,
don't know. That's
it's like
confusing.
psych.
So you talk
Did you hear the story about my socks?
and not washing your socks, yeah.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
gross.
yeah. Um, cool. I had one more, and then I'll be ready for the next bullet point. So
Yeah.
I'm still right. Put my cursor right there. Okay. Beep. Yeah. As a hold on, I need to follow up with that sock comment.
You just say it's gross. I won't be hurt.
Beep. So it was it was the game, the human Shane juice that made the socks carry their power.
God, that made me sick to my stomach. That's so gross. Yeah, whatever it was, it's like I said, like you with baseball players, you have like this like routine, and so if something goes wrong on the routine, then it's obviously that you didn't do the routine right. Like the pattern is off. So like if you
Right.
don't get the pattern right, then it was like so yeah, I mean, and that wasn't the only one. I used to have to make sure that my sunflower seeds were in the right pocket. I used to have to make sure that like when I went to bat, I tapped the plate a couple times before I got a hit. Like there's all kinds of little rituals and stuff that were like, this is gonna lead me to that thing that I want.
Yeah, that's great.
Uh-huh.
Go, I'll go back to just talking about this pareidolia, the visual pattern recognition. So when I was in undergrad, I took this perception class that was taught essentially by a teacher whose research was largely focused in vision, although he did talk about all various types of perception. Um, there was this interesting segment where he talked about this effect that we tend to see faces and things, and they actually were unpacking like how much do you have to see to detect a face, and they're like, honestly, 2
Mhm.
dots is often sufficient. Like and that's sort of why people can look at car headlights and see eyes, and why that's been used in animation, because It requires very little for us. Like two dots on a horizontal plane is all we really need to start imagining there's a face there. Any other feature that could possibly make sense with that will just add to the sense of there being a face. But yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting because that also sort of then immediately unpacked for me the fact that, like, I think that I probably would have seen, you know, you look at a mountain ridge and you're like, oh, that could be like a nose, and those could be the eyes, and that could be, you know, and
Yeah.
that then is, you are able to spin that into stories of like, let's create a legend about this or a myth about this, or hey, let's even believe this is real, like there's actually a giant who is this mountain range is a slumbering giant, you know, whatever it is.
Right.
And so I thought that was a fun thing to share.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes sense. I mean, people seek patterns in places where there's missing information. They seek patterns in places where it just like it's fun to think about. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons, but people seek patterns in these spaces, and that's why we're even talking about this to begin with.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. There's a study that did a lot that was unpacking these conspiracy theories, and particularly pattern recognition. And it's been cited quite a lot because it actually it had 5 different experiments. So this is a 2017 study that found this apophenia thing as a key feature of conspiracy theories and conspiracy theorists, more specifically. And in one of their studies, 233 United States citizens, not undergraduate students, amazingly, I was surprised. Like they just like were able to recruit citizens. They tried to guess the next result of a coin toss and a series of coin tosses. So just heads or tails, you got one of those two things, right? And those people that came into the study and they had reported that they already believed in some conspiracy or conspiracy theory. They also then believed that there was a pattern to the coin toss and that the experimenters were conspiring to arrange the coin tosses so that their guess would be wrong. I mean, it's a coin toss. Like, it's one of those events that's widely regarded as one of the most random things that can happen, because they're so difficult to control that you can't really easily predict what it's going to be. And yet these people who are conspiracy minded, who see patterns where patterns don't exist, they interpreted the coin toss as someone who's pulling the strings. Like they've got the fabric of reality wrapped around their fingers, baby.
Yeah, it's amazing that they would even join the study to begin with. Like,
it's true.
Given that they're likely just being like, no, I'm not gonna join your experiment.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, like this, like, what do you like? So my favorite thing about all this, and we'll probably talk about this later too, is the idea like when you ask the question why, usually their entire argument falls apart. Like,
yes.
why would they rig the coin toss? Like, there are no stakes in that whatsoever. So
right.
Anyway, so in another study from the same experiment, 214 participants viewed 2 types of paintings that were either structured, meaning that they had actual patterns designed by the artist, or chaotic, in which they were random shapes, colors, arrangements of color, etc., etc. And so the people with rational belief saw patterns in the structured paintings, although the irrationally believing participants did not. Alternatively, the rational people did not see patterns in the chaotic paintings, but the irrational conspiracy theorists did. And so essentially, it suggested that when you are in that frame of mind, actual patterns don't even register as patterns. You actually see patterns in things that don't exist, but you ignore patterns that do.
Right. Which says a lot, I think, potentially about this. And again,
a little bit.
Interestingly, the opposite is also kind of true, which is we may fail to perceive real patterns that exist if they are difficult to detect as patterns. A 1997 study showed that a 1997 study showing this suggested whether or not something appears random or patterned has to do with how complex it appears and how easily we feel like we can detect those patterns. Essentially what they found was that if they showed people a string of X's and O's that were actually statistically patterned, because it was so hard to like visually observe a pattern in the what looked like a random string, people were less likely to report that there was a pattern, even though there actually was. And then when they showed them random things where there was only a few options and they could imposed the idea of a pattern on top of it, they did see a pattern, even though it was actually technically random, like there was no actual pattern. And again, what they were showing was whether or not we perceive it to be a pattern has to do with how difficult it is to what they describe as mentally encode it, which is to say how difficult it is, I think, to recognize, to sort of process it and parse it into easily recognizable bins. And the more difficult it is, the less likely people are to see it as a pattern. The easier it is, the more quickly they impose the idea of a pattern, again, whether or not it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so a 2018 study found that those who tended to see patterns where they don't, where those patterns didn't exist, are highly susceptible to pseudoscientific statements, even when the suicide the beep, even when the pseudoscientific statements were completely fabricated nonsense. So this is why it's important to talk about this idea of pattern recognition and in this type of space, because people who are not recognizing these patterns, or that are finding patterns in places that the patterns don't exist, are more susceptible to things that are not true, to sciences that are not real, to practices that are harmful, that are dangerous, to dangerous thoughts, to dangerous kind of practices, and really dangerous theories, which leads us to a lot of kind of what we're seeing today with really dangerous conspiracy theorists.
And I wish I would have written one of them down. I thought about doing it, but as an example of I don't have an exact example of the sentences that they gave them, but yeah, they essentially in that study looked at people who were already like leaning toward conspiracy theories, and they would literally, and I mean completely fabricated it, and they would just string together random like words, like they were words that were parts of speech that technically form a sentence, but it was complete nonsense. And yet these people who believe conspiracies were like, they would view this as a profound statement when they would as they were like rating how if it seemed legitimate and profound or something like that, and they were like just random strings of words that they were then interpreting to having all this meaning that they couldn't possibly, like, they weren't taking existing conspiracy theory statements, they were just it was totally just words pulled out of a dictionary basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we've also previously discussed confirmation bias on the show before, but this is another tendency and human bias that tends to this is another tendency, human bias, in which people are more likely to believe evidence that supports their preconceived beliefs and then ignore or downplay evidence that contradicts their beliefs. And so you can see how that immediately ties into this general orientation to believing in conspiracies, because whatever makes you right, you're like, yep, 100% on board with that. I don't even care how thin of an argument that is, like, it makes me right, and so I'm down with it. That other thing over there, that like hardcore ironclad bulletproof evidence you've got, don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So whenever something significant happens, like really significant, like an election has a surprising result, a virus ravages an entire planet, unfortunate set of circumstances results in an explosion that levels part of a city, we want a big explanation. It has to be bigger than something that's simple. And we want to believe a radical shadow government is displeased with their puppet. We want to believe that scientists designed a virus to control the population. We want to believe a secret attack was intended to destabilize an economy. So this is kind of what we call a proportionality bias. So, and we want to believe a powerful group of people are secretly behind the devastation because it feels unsatisfying to have a mundane answer, such as A, more people turned out in key voting districts, B, a highly infectious virus eventually adapted to humans, or C, some lazy and stupid decisions placed a ton of explosive material into a warehouse that essentially functioned as a pressure cooker. So there are more likely serious examples, but those are in real examples and true explanations for these things. But people want something bigger, more dramatic, more sensational.
Yeah, and that we saw that a lot with the 2001 9/11 terrorist attacks. That the idea that it was some people who hijacked a plane and flew into these buildings and killed so many people, that wasn't a satisfying explanation. Like, this was such a major event that there had to be a bigger explanation, and so you had people looking for one. And so that's essentially that proportionality bias, just as you outlined, is just that we want Like if there's a really profound consequence, we need there to be a profound cause. And so people tend to be more satisfied with these sort of bigger things, and aren't as satisfied with mundane answers. And if you're a conspiracy, if you're conspiracy minded, you're already seeing the world in dazzling, mystical, sentient shadows. So another bias is this idea of projecting, and that is that these conspiracy theorists will project their doubt and insecurities onto others around them, and then they then view those people as having suspicious motives because they themselves are suspicious, right? They're like, I don't trust things. I'm sure that there's all this stuff going on that I don't know about behind the scenes, and so therefore these other people that I'm around me also must have, they have their motives are suspicious, and so that's that one of these other biases is this projecting idea.
Yeah, and I think about this in with Florida being Florida, there's always been comments about elections and whatnot, and there was the one election where Jeb Bush won, and they found legitimate evidence that it might have swung the wrong way, because there were issues with ballots and hanging chads, and there was actual evidence of the idea that like the ballots weren't punched correctly, so they weren't counted correctly. That's why there were so many recounts and stuff when Bush ran against Gore all those years ago. And so it's interesting though, like when that stuff comes out and everybody's like, no, 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 no. But then when there's no evidence, like in the current kind of climate where everybody said the election was stolen, there's no evidence to support anything that people are claiming. It's just fascinating how people will just like project, and they'll make these confirmations. Like it's just, there's so much bias involved in this that it's like you just flat out ignore facts.
Right. Now, we should talk about why we're susceptible to this bias, why we're susceptible to these stories. But first, what we should do is pause for some people to advertise things, and we'll be right back. Okay, so those were some advertisements that happened to you, and thank you. I'm sorry. Let's We've been talking about essentially some of the biases that are behind, or at least involved in believing in conspiracy theories. Let's turn now to talking about why this works. Why are we susceptible to these biases?
Yeah, and there are many reasons why we're so susceptible, and one of them is this idea of pattern recognition. Pattern recognition is actually a highly adaptive trait. We need pattern recognition to be able to see different things and be able to recognize like pathways. And there's probably a survival element to this that I don't really know enough about evolutionary biology to speak to, but many researchers hypothesize that we have evolved to be highly sensitive to patterns because in doing so, it helps us remember threats such as poisonous food, predators. It helps us to remember rewards such as shelters and delicious food. However, this hyper alertness to patterns immediately paved the way for wildly irrational leaps, especially once we evolved language and culture. So, indeed, some psychologists and historians think that we have probably believed conspiracy theories as long as we have had the capacity to talk about them, that it goes back that far, that we've always been conspiracy theorists. I want to know kind of like, once we started talking, what those conspiracies would look like. I wonder what they would be. It's like, it's like, where did you get that shiny rock? So probably from up there,
That's right. And I think that and because I didn't dig too much into sort of what these historians said. Mostly they were talking about like this seems to have been with us forever, but essentially I think what they were referring to is the idea that the natural events were explained by supernatural phenomenon. So it wasn't just the fact that like a hurricane hit here, but it was the gods were displeased with whatever.
Yeah.
And so essentially just turned to things that couldn't be observed that had power to explain things that were happening around you. And so I think that's mostly what they're referring to with those old ones. Now,
how many conspiracy theories do you think the Odyssey created? Like in that regards, like like a husband runs away and then there's just like a cow shows up. It's like my husband was turned into a cow and that's why he's gone. He's here, and it's like no, he just got lost at sea at some point in time.
You believe the Odyssey is real?
Man, Homer had some things to say.
All right. A 2017 article in the journal Current current directions in psychological science suggests that there are beep suggests that there are three primary drivers of the tendency to embrace these conspiracy beliefs. That is the aversiveness of uncertainty and preference for explanation, the desire to feel in control of one's fate, and finally the social standing in an in-group and the associated veneration and sense of heroism called associated veneration and sense of heroism, and these three are called epistemic, existential, and social, respectively.
All right. So epistemic motives. What this refers to is the idea that uncertainty.
Do you want to do a quick vocab on veneration? I was trying to tag that one for it.
Okay. All right. Beep. So Abraham, what does veneration mean?
Yeah, veneration. So this is a fun word. Essentially, it just means regarding something with great respect or esteem. And so in this case, talking about this group sort of views themselves with great respect and esteem, that they're holy warriors, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. All right. That's a good word. We should probably use that more often.
Indeed.
Now, the epistemic motive is the idea that uncertainty is aversive. And this makes sense. I don't like not knowing things. I am a knowledge seeker myself. I mean, the whole reason we do this podcast is to seek more knowledge. So we like to learn about things as we go.
We're greedy for it.
We are, I will be a glutton for information. Now, what we're saying here is that when something happens that we don't understand or don't have an immediate explanation for, any explanation at all is tempting to believe rather than accepting that we don't know. It's very difficult to say we don't know, and so we want explanations, we want reasons, and you'll see this really, I feel like, magnified in grief spaces, where people want to know there's got to be a reason why. There's always a reason, and it's people have a hard time accepting that accidents happen and things like that. So I think that you see that clearly in those spaces, but this happens everywhere.
Yes, very much so. And actually that is a feature that is sort of a risk factor, is that the beliefs tend to spring up around traumatic events, things that are aversive and whatnot. And this whole thing of needing to feel like we know and to try and get rid of uncertainty is probably related to the fact that if we feel we are in the know about something, either we know it and no one else does, or we have some explanation and then we feel like we have some control over our fates. And so this is the existential motive, and this is the idea that believing these things gives us the feeling that we can at the very least predict the things that will happen, if not avoid and maybe even control them, altogether. And you can see how the confirmation bias that we previously spoke about really helps support this idea along, that we need this idea of this control. And so again, if we have an idea about what happened because we're just going to make up or believe the first explanation that comes along, well, then we're going to start looking for pieces of data that confirm that explanation, so that, again, we have that sense of control, and we'll ignore those pieces of information that contradict us, because that would just bring us back toward an uncertainty and a lack of control.
Right. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now, all of this happens in a specific context that brings us to the social motive, right? And the social motive creates an insulated group of heroes that see their actions as noble, and just anything else is suspect, right? So I am engaged in this behavior to save you, to be helpful. Like, you should know this information. We know and you don't. And it's noble. It is for the good of humanity, and anybody else is acting against those movements. Now, furthermore, anything bad that happens is easily attributable to the out group. So if I'm part of the in group, it's not us, it's them, it's this group, it's Black Lives Matter, it's Antifa, it's all those things, right? And this can easily lead to an ends justify the means approach, and it divides the world into black and white, good versus evil, us versus them, and that creates significant problems that we have seen played out in the news multiple times in the last several years.
Yeah, a lot of these people think that they're on these holy crusades to save the world, and they're out there just causing reckless, endless harm and helping nobody. But they believe that they're on the side of good, and that the fact that they can do things that are horrible because they're justified in their holy mission. And so, they are excited when bad things happen to good people, and they're more than happy to take down innocent people if they feel like it helps them accomplish their goal or their mission, as it relates to these conspiracies. So tying
Yeah.
these together, you imagine some significant event happens. It's probably going to be something terrible that happened. We want a large explanation. We find satisfaction in having an answer that targets this evil other who was trying to threaten us behind our backs, but we found them out. And now we'll scream about it and rally others to our cause, others who will see us as heroes for speaking out and protecting the cause. And so that's sort of grabbing all the little pieces that we've talked about and roping it together into one recipe for a conspiracy movement.
Yeah, an anti-information stew, if you will.
Yeah, I like that. Anti-information stew.
Yeah, so going back to our friend Jitarth at the beginning of the show, Jitarth shared that he, I'm sorry, beep. Jitarth shared that he started making his way out of the conspiracy wormhole he'd been sucked into. So he says, quote, "I would have been so happy to see Hillary Clinton dragged in front of a military tribunal, even though she's a civilian," he said. Quote, "That still bothers me to this day, how willing and happy and joyfully I would have reacted to something that I would normally want no part in. This is how you get good people to do bad things," end quote. And you could see that the narrative, the languaging around this, the misinformation, the emails, it's all about the emails, all that stuff together kind of tied into leading people into this mob mentality with this in group and leading to things that were actually not very great things.
Yeah, and again, people who do not have a value of like causing harm to other people, like are thrilled at the idea of harm coming to other people when those people are seen as the adversary to their conspiracy beliefs. So
Yeah.
for those behavior analysts out there who are listening and maybe trying to translate this all back to behaviorese, I'll do my best to sort of to change gears a little bit for you. And I think this is also useful for other people who are not behavior analysts to just sort of hear a way of talking about it, because some of these are terms you're still familiar with, even if you're not in that field. And one is that going back to this epistemic motives that we talked about, this uncertainty thing, there's negative reinforcement in avoiding and escaping the aversiveness of essentially having nothing to say or understand about some kind of event. And so what happens is that in the wake of some aversive thing that takes place, when we don't have any meaningful action that we can take, one meaningful action is create meaning, which is to make that lack of action of availability go away, and then instead we have access to something that has us feel like we're at least participating meaningfully in it.
Yeah, and then the existential part of this is the feeling of a free operant, right? So the idea that control over one's environment and the positive reinforcement of feeling safe and secure, there is some kind of metaphysical reinforcement related to that. I believe Pat Fryman does a really good talk on this. That's really awesome.
Nice.
And there's a little bit of automatic reinforcement that goes on, like arranging things in straight lines and kind of connecting the dots. And there's something reinforcing about having information and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes into this, but really the idea of the existential motive is this free operant and controlling the reinforcers within that environment.
Yeah, and then the social component, and that maybe sounds fairly obvious, but there's likely social positive reinforcement from a peer group, and that sort of self-sustaining reaffirming of one another's behavior inside of that group, as well as some negative reinforcement in avoiding the fear of looking stupid by putting out these ideas amongst a group of people who aren't going to buy it, or alternatively, and maybe more importantly relative to this, is the idea that you believe. So I think what happens for some of these people is that when they hear about a conspiracy, they're like, I've been duped and now I'm in the know. And so now I can avoid looking stupid because I'm going to shout out that I know the truth. And so the social part that comes in, that is people are both sort of reinforcing the things that you're saying, though these conspiracy things. You're also avoiding looking dumb because you believed that there wasn't a conspiracy before, even though there's not.
Yeah. There's something super reinforcing about being in the know, Like you're in on the secret, you're in on the gag, you're in on it, and now you get an opportunity to kind of be the first one to have this information. There's a lot of these little contingencies within this that, and especially because there's very rarely a time where somebody will present a conspiracy theory and somebody will be like, you need to go talk to somebody.
Yeah.
Like, most people are like, oh, that sounds okay. Like, because people don't like confrontations. So they're going to avoid
Right.
telling somebody like the moon is real. It
Yeah.
is not a lunar base for reptiles. Get out of here.
Yeah.
But people don't. They're like, okay, Steve.
Yeah.
Sounds
They'll-
good.
Yeah. I think people value though, like, we don't want to ruffle any feathers here, so just let him say his crazy stuff and wear his underwear on his head, and that's okay.
Yeah. Oh, sure. The Earth is hollow. Yes, of course it is. Why? How could I have not? What of course, there's no core to the Earth.
Yeah. I agree. We need more evidence that the Earth is not hollow. So we should assume that it is until we have proof to the contrary. All right.
An ice wall. Of course, an ice wall. Of course, NASA would defend the ice wall.
Some of this does seem fairly harmless, but I think, as we've already sort of described, there is harm. And we'll talk more about the harm after we take a pause for some advertisements.
So, real quick, do you think that we'll get through the rest of this? This will be a longer episode.
What are you feeling like? Because we're at the 50-minute mark. We've got the harm, the solution, tidbits and take homes and recommendations.
I think this is just be a longer episode. I think we could finish it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Beep. And we are back. So we've been talking about essentially understanding the components of why we're susceptible to these conspiracies. Let's talk about why these are really a problem. What's the harm here?
Yeah. So this is kind of, in our snarkiness that we are known for. It's probably been made pretty obvious. The belief in the conspiracy theory leads people to make horribly self-destructive and socially destructive choices. They make choices that are anti-scientific. They make choices that put people in harm's way. They make choices that are really going to kind of stoke a fire for a larger in group to get more active and become more problematic over time, as we've seen, and specifically the January 6th insurrection and things like that. But we've got another story that we want to share that will highlight exactly how individually harmful these types of things can be.
Perfect. So our second story is about a man named Lenny Posner. Lenny is or was the father of 3 children in Connecticut. And I'm going to pause really quick for a trigger warning for folks out there that this section of this story is going to contain details about harm coming to children. So you might want to skip ahead a few minutes if you don't want to hear that. So as I said, Lenny is the father of 3 children in Connecticut. His family was struck with tragedy on December 14th, 2012. And that date might stand out for people because this is when a gunman entered Sandy Hook Elementary School and opened fire, killing 26 people.
Yes. So unfortunately, 20 of those among the deceased were children, and one of those children was Noah, Lenny's son. And the tragedy of all of this is well established. It's been well researched. It's easily verifiable fact. This is not something that is made up. I mean, it is. You can find lots of information on this if you are seeking it.
However, in returning to our boner bill pushing pseudoscience vomit induced, damn it. I wanted this to be so good. Beep. In returning to our boner pill pushing pseudoscience vomit inducing disease ridden hate mongering foul vermin conspiracy theorist dumpster fire of a human, Alex Jones, for reasons that are unclear, immediately began pushing the conspiracy that Sandy Hook shooting was a false con operation in which actors staged the whole thing and constructed it in Photoshop.
So I think I would like to take a pause here and just say this sentiment that he put out is just absolutely disgusting.
Yes.
Doesn't matter what his motive is. Disgusting. Horrible stuff.
Yeah, this is truly terrible. This is among the lowest that you can go.
Yeah. So as if the grief of losing a child wasn't enough, now Lenny and his family, they were subjected to hearing these horrible lies about their son. And in what Posner later claimed was a naive attempt to rectify the situation, what he did was he posted what he believed was irrefutable proof. He posted a picture of his son's birth and death certificates on social media. No parent should ever have to do this.
Absolutely.
Period.
And they, I mean, they were already being sort of harassed, but putting this on social media put a spotlight on him and his family. What was sort of this relatively light harassment they were suffering before turned into perpetual trauma and re-victimization. He started receiving death threats, constant harassment from QAnon supporters and general conspiracy theorists. He ended up trying to move his family to Florida, away from Connecticut, just to get away from it all. But of course, the hate mob followed. And as soon as they found out where he was, the terrorists would post a map with a pin at his address online so that people would once again descend on his house and leave him death threats and, do all kinds of horrible things to him. And he ended up moving at least 8 times over 5 years. And that was at the time that I found this in a 2019 article by the on the Guardian. I'm gonna say it a little bit differently. Beep. And that was at the time of this 2019 Guardian article was published. So it's been a couple of years since then. It's possible he's moved, 10, 12 times, total, or 4 or 5 more times since the article was written.
Yeah, absolutely. So after escaping the Q septic tank, Jatarth, our friend from the first story, later lamented how much damage his descent into madness had caused in his own life. So he feels that every single relationship in his life was affected by his journey through the Q-spiracy. Quote, it destroyed some of them to this day. It strained a lot of them to this day, end quote. And conspiracy theorist researcher Travis View summed it up best. Quote, QAnon only hurts people, and it has helped nobody, end quote.
Now, again, we're speaking a lot about Q, and beyond damage caused by QAnon, people who are likely to believe in conspiracies are also less likely, or also going to do or not do other things that are harmful. They're less likely to vaccinate their kids. They're less likely to care about or attempt to reduce their carbon footprint or believe in climate change. They're less likely to engage in politics, although, given maybe what we've seen, maybe just less likely to engage meaningfully in politics. But yeah, so we see there's a lot of other sort of personal decisions that come out of this as well that are harmful.
Yeah, but one of the other biggest problems that we see with the effect of conspiracy theories is that the victim of the conspiracy theory mindset. So the believer, and a lot of the folks that follow along with these conspiracy theories are often trapped. What they're finding is they're trapping themselves in an endless loop of some kind of alternative reality. Research shows that one of the biggest predictors of believing a conspiracy theory is believing in any other conspiracy theory. So essentially, what happens is I believe in one, I'm going to start believing into the next one, and the next one, until I'm kind of in this endless loop of misinformation and pseudoscience.
And so that means that if you believe that vaccines cause autism, you're also likely to believe the earth is flat, that JFK's assassination was some kind of inside job, that humans have never been to the moon, that the Sandy Hook shooting was faked, etc. There's so many that those are just the ones we've mentioned here, and there are plenty of others that are floating around in the ether.
Yeah, absolutely. But then you'll also end up believing completely contradictory theories simultaneously and not even have a problem with the dueling realities. So, for example, people will believe both that Osama bin Laden was killed a long time ago and that he's still alive today. They will also believe that the coronavirus is completely fake and that it was manufactured by Chinese scientists. They'll believe both that Donald Trump is still in power and that the election was stolen by the current president, Joe Biden. And while most people would logically and immediately identify that one of those two positions can't work, you have to have one or the other. You can't have one and the other.
Right.
The conspiracy-addled brain is functionally broken in that, and reality doesn't matter. And emotions and social media are completely running the show for that empty husk of a human. And it's unfortunate because you can see it so clearly. It's like, it's like, okay, so the election was rigged. That means all of the election was rigged. And people are like, no, just these states. Right. So it becomes a democratic, conspiracy theory versus like an issue with elections. And so it's unfortunate to watch.
Yeah. Also, though, just not even consistently in those states, because the ballots, while they may have chosen Joe Biden, they they still elected Republican senators. So just part of the
Mhm.
ballot was rigged, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah. But you can't present that. If you present that, it just in one ear, right out the other, right? Like it becomes an issue where like they can't see facts because they're so tied to that emotional in those biases that they have.
So if there's nothing you can do, if there is no argument that is convincing, if this is this deep well of a wormhole that through from which one rarely or never escapes, what can we do about this, if anything? So unfortunately, there isn't a lot.
Yeah. So as Jadarth pointed out, as pointed out, as Jadarth pointed out, one of the things that helped him was that when he had the bravery to say that he might have been wrong, the response was overwhelming sympathy and compassion from those who had been fighting against the conspiracy theorists. He said, "quote It has to start with empathy and understanding." End quote. And that's what Jadarth had said, kind of like entering or like leaving this space.
Yeah, is creating an opportunity to not criticize those people who are trying to climb their way out of this
Mhm.
cesspool they found themselves in. And it helps us to remember that a lot of these conspiracies are started by a very small number of malicious people. Researchers found that only 12 people were responsible for the vast majority of all COVID-19 conspiracy theories and propaganda. Only 12. And we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who have believed these. And there's this tiny group of 12 angry men sitting around.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't all men, but just as a reference to the movie. But
It's likely they're probably like insecure white men.
yeah, the incels. Um, yeah, that this small group of people, and I think that it's also safe to point beep. Everyone else of the, damn it. Okay. Beep. Everyone else was just a victim of their lies and rhetoric. And that includes these people who are out there now pushing conspiracy theories that are just sort of everyday citizens on social media. They're also victims in this too. Although I think it is beep, I think it is safe to point the blame at all public figures who chose to give a louder mouthpiece to these lies and thus rope in even more victims of the conspiracy. So,
Yeah.
as we like to say, we're punching up. The people here who I think get responsibility for this are the people who started it, but also the people who chose to give it a mouthpiece and to spread it around with a much larger microphone. They have a significant role to play in this. Joe Rogan.
Yeah, there's difference between talking opinions and also spreading misinformation, and that's a real problem. Like you have to understand your audience and understand that people are susceptible to you as a celebrity. So everybody should go read Bad Advice by Paul Offit. Really great, like in
Yes.
in episode reference, because it really highlights how people like Joe Rogan, and Alex Jones and Jenny McCarthy and these people who are incredibly influential can share misinformation that is incredibly dangerous based on a conspiracy theory.
I had something I wanted to add here that I didn't write, and I completely forgot what it was.
Oh no!
No, if it comes back to me, I'll throw it in there.
All right. So we're on something else.
Oh, yeah. All right. Beep. Now, something else we can do is to look at the risk factors for believing in conspiracies and try and target those for, is this a place where we can maybe intervene and try and prevent people from going down this hole of self-deception in the first place?
Yeah, and one of the major risk factors we would look at here is a lack of education. So, and now this is how this is related is unclear. The studies haven't really shown that. But one working hypothesis is that being less educated makes people feel less in control of their lives and less certainty about things in the world, and therefore finding conspiracy theories, they will find them more attractive as a result of that. Now, if we ensure protection of our educational institutions and promote PSAs and other campaigns to spread truth and science, that's one way that we can actually help to fight the tendencies that lean toward conspiracies for comfort. Now, a problem with that is that many conspiracy theorists will also believe that universities are brainwashing brainwashing liberal institutions that everybody that's going in are just they're just being turned into Democrats as they leave.
Yeah, that's definitely a frame of mind that's out there, and you know, it provides an easy insulation of like, oh, education bad, just believe me, um,
Hmm.
and create this sort of cult following mentality
Quote,
sort of thing.
quote, I did my research. No, you did some reading.
Yeah, Ron DeSantis is one of the governors in this country working really hard to ensure that uh, it is no longer the case that educational institutes are places where you can get trusted information. He really wants to turn
Yeah.
them into just like dumpster fires as much as
Hmm.
possible.
Yeah, this place is already dangerous enough. Well, I don't know what he's trying to do here. It's absurd.
So that reminds me, there's actually something I wasn't planning on talking about in here, but I think it is worth pointing out as we're talking about this, which is a lot of people are like, well, we just want to hear both sides. The problem is it's not always worth hearing both sides. Like there aren't always two even sides to a topic. It's not like, oh, well, let's really dig in and see if the earth is flat. No, that is not worth spending our time on. Like we don't need to
Right.
waste time and effort debunking every asinine concept that someone chooses to spout out when we've got all of the evidence to the contrary. Now, when there is contradictory evidence, that's worth exploring. We want to have discourse, we want to have dissenting opinions that we can explore and expand our knowledge further because we're willing to push ourselves and consider alternative ideas. But not all ideas are equal in their worthiness to be considered. And so, like, some of these are, they're just not worth us even talking about as like a, well, maybe this as a plausible hypothesis. They're not plausible hypotheses. They are utter nonsense and they're not worth spending time on. And so I think there's this important point in here of people trying to say like, well, I just want to hear both sides. I'm like, there aren't always two sides, you know. Sometimes it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah. Yeah. Like ivermectin does not cure COVID. We know that.
Yes.
We know that. Like, so
Right.
that's not a side. That's not a side worth hearing. And
Exactly.
that's the thing that I get. That's the point that we're trying to make. Like, you know, there are plenty of people out there that will come. I mean, you could sit in a basement listening to people talk about all kinds of things, and most of the time there's not going to be any theory that holds water. And that, I think you make an excellent point here, and it's really important. Like, I too would want to hear all of the sides that are valid and worth investigating when we don't have enough information. But when we have enough information and we can make the argument against the opinion that you're trying to share, I mean, at that point in time, it's not worth even having the discussion.
Yeah, like how much money has been spent researching things like ivermectin as a cure for COVID when we know it's not going to work? Like that was a waste of money spurred on by a nonsense conspiracy theory that had nothing to do with anything.
Right.
Let's
But
look
I am
at
okay. I am okay with people drinking their own pee right now. Like, that's what you get.
yeah, that's fair. If you're dumb enough to believe it, then I suppose you get. Well, again, I want to recognize these people are victims here. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but the people who are pushing it, they can certainly go down
They
that
can drink their own
golden.
pee.
Yeah, they can drink their own pee. Another thing here, again, thinking about the damage, and this is not one I had thought to put in here initially, but is there are people going around, they were burning down cell phone towers in Britain because of this conspiracy that 5G was causing COVID. Both, again, that COVID didn't exist and that it was being caused by cell phone towers, which doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Like, I don't understand.
Right. How do you
Neither of
hold those
those
two
things.
ideas?
Yeah, those two ideas are contradictory, and neither of them make any sense. And
Right.
so I don't know. There's a lot of harm because that we see both financially and again that whole like equal weight thing. Just it doesn't really pan out here. So let's get back to what we were talking about though. Is that part of this thing about why we feel like it's important to continue to push these messages either in financial institutions, in social media campaigns, whatever have you. Research has shown that the more times that someone hears something, the more likely they are to believe it. So let's give them frequent, heavy doses of truth and critical thinking so that it'll eventually just kind of creep its way in there for them. And that if there's even a little bit, again, as I mentioned earlier, just that iota of critical thinking in there, that'll usually start to widen the cracks in their flawed beliefs.
Yeah, absolutely. Another problem is that verifiable, concrete, irrefutable evidence often washes over those conspiracy theorists like water over an oil slicked carcass. Except maybe not completely. Research actually shows that even though the immediate effect of contradictory evidence is not obvious, continuously providing that proof will gradually help people change their minds. And this is really important: consistency. And
Right.
this is something that I would make the argument that people have really struggled with COVID and the COVID vaccine and all that stuff, is that you have had an issue of consistency, even though it's scientifically consistent.
Right.
What in that it changes with new evidence, people see that as an inconsistency, so they can't trust science. So it
Yeah.
becomes this kind of larger goal. And you can go listen to the episode on the COVID vaccine specifically to kind of see why people would have a hard time with that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's what it is: consistency with information. For scientists, that's difficult because it's not always absolute.
Yeah, the message changed, the method did not. The method was consistent, but that resulted in
Right.
different new knowledge that had to be disseminated, even though we were still evolving that knowledge. It was because we had to move and we had to do something, and so we did the best that we could with the information that we had. Now, very broadly, helping people feel in control of their lives, reducing fear about uncertainty, and overall avoiding spreading fear and hate, but instead trying to spread hope and compassion are likely effective ways to help reduce the appeal and effectiveness of conspiracy theories. We should provide opportunities for and incentivize engaging in polite discourse to help give people a chance to voice their concerns and be heard, and then give them a chance to be able to hear actual information in return without being condescending jerks about it. And I say that with, the irony that some of our language in this discussion has sounded like condescending jerks. And again, I think it's worth just reiterating the point that we really believe that the most people who are out there believing these conspiracies are victims. They are victims of a crappy system that roped them in by exploiting human biases, their fears, and their tendencies to like want those kind of explanations, right?
Yeah.
And so what I would like to acknowledge is that all of the hateful things, or not hateful, all of the criticisms that I have been leveling out here are at conspiracy theories themselves and at those people who are political and public figures who have made and or have specifically orchestrated disseminating these and starting those conspiracy theories. Those people is where I think I have major criticism and blame. Everyone else out there, like I have a compassion for you and your situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, we can be snarky and condescending and stuff like that. And we do understand that. But our ultimate goal is to understand that, like, yes, people need help getting out of these situations, because at the end of the day, what's happening is harmful, and so I think that comes back to things like holding platforms accountable, right? If you have a giant microphone and a platform is giving you a space to amplify that to a group of people, then you are responsible for what happens, or at least on some level, and so kind of looking at this idea, when this giant microphone is given to the minority of conspiracy spreading leeches, then this is an integral part of fighting this issue, right? Understanding that these platforms, these people, these groups, the people that are sharing this information have this level of or they should have this level of accountability that they don't currently have. And that's why you're having debates about Joe Rogan, and you're having debates about these people, because there is a level of accountability. Like, how accountable should these people be when they are so misinformed and they are willfully spreading misinformation about these types of things that are hurting people?
Yeah, and the platforms have the ability to control that microphone, and so they have a role to play for sure.
Absolutely. So, and that's I feel like there's probably an episode somewhere in here about free speech and what that looks like, and we should probably get to that and kind of really unpack what that means at some point. But freedom of speech does not mean freedom of consequences.
Yeah, that's actually I've kind of felt like we should probably just tackle the idea of freedom generally, because it's kind of a loaded term, and I think honestly just surveying the different ways that it's used would be a really useful exercise. And understanding what it absolutely is not, which I think is where there's some misunderstanding.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we do have some interesting tidbits of information before we wrap this up. One that we've tossed around several times is this idea that birds aren't real.
I love this one so much. So, uh, the birds aren't real movement has kind of satirized the conspiracy theory movement and actually developed a group that's in on the joke in a movement similar to the flying spaghetti monster, or it's formerly referred to as pastafarians.
Yeah.
And so, although some have expressed concern that this may take on an unintended life of its own as a legitimate conspiracy, there's some evidence that it has happened for some people. We've seen that the founder of the movement, other social researchers, so far believe that the harm is minimal, and minimal is not zero. So we have to recognize that. But they're kind of saying that at the end of the day, there's minimal harm compared to some of these other theories.
Yeah, that most people that are part of the movement are in on the joke, and they're in on the idea. They see the satire and they run with it. So they go and they'll do these big protests that are counter protests to people who are doing the protests that are on the side of conspiracy theories, and they're sort of there to out crazy the crazy, if you will.
Yeah, yep, absolutely.
There's another one that was just kind of fun. The QAnon followers believed that John F. Kennedy, the assassinated president, for those of you who aren't familiar with that or aren't from this country, which is a lot of you, they believed that he was going to magically appear in Dallas in 2021. He was killed 60 years ago. No, 50 years ago. Wait,
Yeah.
hold on. Wait, 60 years ago? So it was 60. Yeah, it was about 6 years ago. Yeah.
A little less than 60. Yeah.
Beep. So he was killed about 60 years ago. And so when he, of course, didn't show up, they decided that Keith Richards, frontman of the Rolling Stones, is in fact John F. Kennedy. So that's fun.
These are the leaps in logic. I mean, this is. I mean, when you unpack the JFK conspiracy too, I mean, there's just so much. There's like people talk about ice bullets. I mean, that's one that's come up. The magic bullet theory is one that you hear a lot.
Yeah.
There's one that's like the Badge Man. Badge Man is a conspiracy theory that's in there too. That's a lot of fun. There's a lot of conspiracy theories within that. And the thought is that the JFK assassination was really kind of like a catalyst for current modern day conspiracy theory kind of approaches.
Yeah, I could see that. There's also one I heard that there was like like one of the armed soldiers that was in the sort of motorcade, but walking behind, like accidentally fired their gun. I was like, man, it's hard enough to hit a target when you're aiming, let alone accidentally your way into a target like that.
Yeah, accidentally changing the entire world.
Yeah,
with one shot.
There's also, for those people who are interested, there's a movie called Conspiracy Theory, 1997 film with Mel Gibson and I think Julia Roberts and some other big name actors in it. I remember enjoying this movie when I was younger, but the reviews I was looking at were really unkind. It got like a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. Most professional reviewers had nothing kind to say about it. And so I don't think I would recommend it, but it was a movie that existed. So if you're interested in checking out Conspiracy Theory,
it's out there.
Yeah, it's out there. It actually is about a conspiracy theory that turns out to be real. Ooh. But
Ooh. Unlike the Da Vinci Code. Oh.
All right. Very good. All right. Let's hit some take-home points really quick. What should we expect or hope that people take away from this discussion, Shane?
I think understanding the mechanisms by which a conspiracy theory comes to be believed is important if you're going to combat it. If we are living in a world where you are pro-science and so much conspiracy theory is anti-science, then understanding how somebody would arrive to those conclusions and understanding that for the most part, they are a victim of circumstance where they're just contacting information. Maybe they have some anecdote or personal experience that would have led them to that type of experience or that type of thought process, whatever it might be. Understanding that, we live in that world. And I think that there is just, it's important to kind of just understand how the pieces fit together for those folks.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of my big take-home points away from all of this is really just this idea that most of the people in this are victims, and they're victims on both sides. They're the victims of the conspiracies that target people who have done nothing wrong, like Lenny Posner and his family. And he's not alone. Like, there are a lot of other people who have been targeted in this way. I actually didn't even include a story that was interesting about a guy who was, there was a shooting like in Florida. He lived in somewhere up north, 1,500 miles away. And he had some sentiment about communism that was like not anti-communist or somewhat pro-communist, and he was just a totally innocent 20-year-old dude or something, and some people picked up on like Reddit that he was a communist, and so they accused him of the shooting, and so there was like flyers and like people out to get him, and
Mhm.
he starts receiving all these threats and like literally did nothing at all, but the conspiracy group decided to pick him and go after him, upended
Yeah.
his life, and so there's victims on that end, and then the people who are also participating in these conspiracies, they perpetrate horrible things, and that's not something necessarily to forgive, but also recognize that they are victims of these massive lies that are being spread around, and that there's, I just, the only way to help them out is to be compassionate to the fact that they did fall victim to this, and then the other thing I think, of course, is to hold accountable those people who have caused the problem in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think probably a final take-home point for me would be just understanding that a lot of this has to do with patterns, and patterns that
Mm.
exist and patterns that don't exist. But a lot of it's based in patterns, and people will find patterns in things that they shouldn't, or that they'll find patterns because they're seeking meaning. They will find patterns because it fits with their core beliefs and their values. People are going to seek and find patterns all the time, and I think that that's a really important kind of concrete thing to look at. It's like, what's the pattern that they're trying to identify? And then when you ask the question of why would they do that? Why would anybody want to defend? Why would NASA defend an ice wall? Why would anybody want to create a robotic drone bird to surveil you? Like what? Like why is that the question? And when you start kind of asking those questions, the patterns fall apart.
Yeah.
And so in true, I mean, why would we fake the moon landing? I mean, there is a legitimate like, oh, we had to beat Russia there, and I totally understand that's like a fair argument. But then why would thousands and thousands of people hide this for decades? Doesn't
Right.
make any sense. So
Also,
ask why.
and then go back to the moon several times after that and put more boots on the ground on the moon.
Right, right.
Uh, Also, I think asking how is another one, because as you said, it was probably more difficult. It would be more difficult to fake a moon landing back then than it would be to just do a moon landing. It
Right.
would be like, how, with the Earth being flat, like how does that work? Like what is it on top of? Who built the thing that is supposed to be this firmament, the stars in the sky that we see above us? How could that possibly work? Like,
Right.
and everything that we can observe directly contradicts all of that. So, um,
My favorite
yeah,
quote. My favorite quote about all that is, "The Flat Earth Society has members all around the globe."
yes, yeah. That's a great one. Um,
Mhm.
so anyway, I don't know if I have any more final take home points. I think that we hit those fairly well. Um, Maybe just saying that. Oh no, so
Something about compassion. Just be compassionate.
yeah, okay. Beep. Yeah, I think just to put a bow on it is being compassionate. I think if we are compassionate toward one another, then we can help at least get the direction to find our way out of this. If we just keep holding each other's feet to the fire, then I think this is going to perpetuate. And so, unfortunately, like, we find ourselves once again in the position of having to turn the other cheek, and be the bigger person. But that's, that I think comes with the territory. And so let's recognize the humanity in one another, and the fact that although this sucks and we hate it and it's terrible that we have to do this, we're going to be humans about it and try and find our way through it.
Yep, absolutely. 100% agree.
Well, let's get to some recommendations. I am
like
going I'm going to do some free buzz marketing a little bit, I guess. If you are in the business of trying to start a podcast, you could do worse than Spreaker.com. So this is the publishing platform that we use for this podcast, and they're actually really good, particularly with things like ads, and helping you navigate ad space and that sort of thing. As if you've heard the lovely ads that we have, which I don't even know what they all are. They fill the space of them, but they're actually, I mean, they're good about, what they actually share and how to set that up in your own feed. They'll auto insert ads if you want them to, and that sort of thing. And you can also control the ad content to a extent. It depends on sort of what level you're at. But they can help you sort of monetize your podcast. So if you're interested in starting a podcast, and I haven't tried other platforms, so I can't speak to how well they work, but I've been pretty happy with Spreaker, and so I would recommend Spreaker if you're interested in going that route.
I back that. I like that recommendation.
Cool.
Good job. Yeah. I'm gonna recommend a series. It's a limited series, and it's come out and it's come under a lot of fire. By the time you hear this, it's been a few weeks at this point. But the series is called The Book of Boba Fett. Have you watched it yet?
I have watched most of it. I'm a few episodes away from finishing it.
Okay. All right. So my thing is I feel like the criticisms are unfounded.
Okay.
In that
I'm not sure what
when
they are.
people a lot of people are saying like Boba Fett is supposed to be this like badass type of character, and he's like softer in this series.
Okay.
And so, you know, my thing is that I kind of go back and I say, you know, character development and growth is important. And Boba Fett is still a cool character, and he has a lot of depth now that he didn't have before, that I think is really important for character development. And I really enjoyed this series. I thought it was really great. And so there's a lot of cool surprises in it. There's a lot of cool cameos in it. There's some really cool payoffs at the end of it. But I think it's great. And honestly, I'm the kind of person that's like, there's no such thing as bad Star Wars. Like, how can you be mad at more Star Wars? I understand the criticisms, but how could you be mad at more Star Wars? Star Wars is great.
Fair enough.
Go watch it.
I will actually say I agree that I think it would not be that interesting of a TV show to see this person who's like kind of just a villain doing villainous things for the sake of being a villain because he's a badass. And I mean, not that he was necessarily going to be regarded as a villain, but like just seeing him be tough all the time on everyone, I feel like this was better because he's, at least from what I've seen so far, he's like smart and savvy, and he's better than the competition because he is clever and not because he's just punching everything that gets in his way. And a lot of times cleverness and power comes from knowing when to make allies of previous enemies, which he does all immediately. Like episode, immediately starting episode 1, we see this. So not really spoiling anything. And I think, I don't know, I really, so far, I think were I to lay any criticism, it's that it is like a flashback inside a TV show because an enormous amount of the story is told via flashback. And that's not problematic necessarily, but it does mean you're keeping track of at least 2 different timelines throughout every episode.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe some people don't like that, but I think it's super well done. And I also love how many practical effects they used for this. Like I can almost not even tell where they're CGI sometimes.
Yeah, it's great. So like I said, I've been really just like, I suspend my disbelief and I just enjoy it for what it is,
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, great. Good recommendation. I'm eager to finish it. I'm glad that you can confirm that the ending was satisfying of this. So
I like it.
All right. Well, if you have anything to say about conspiracy theories, if you would like to share your story about getting into, getting out of, or helping someone else with their plight of conspiracy theories, we would really love to hear from you. If you're willing to share with us, reach out to us on social media at WWDWWD podcast. You can also email us directly if you'd like at info@WWDWWDpodcast.com. You can find more about this episode by going to our website, where you can also submit an email if you'd like to go that route. And if you'd like to tell us about a podcast distribution service or mini limited series that you're interested in, you can also tell us about those things. And definitely special thanks to those people who help make this podcast happen. Those are our lovely Patreon supporters, which includes Amanda, Kathleen, Joshua, Justin, Justine, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, Shauna, and the Daily BA. Thank you all so much for your generous contributions. And of course, thank you to my team, Justin for helping wrangle the audio here. Shane, thank you for recording with me today.
Always.
Selena, Kyle, and of course, Alan, our wonderful other team members, and Britt, who helps us with show notes as well. And I think that is all that I have. Is there anything that I missed, Shane?
Nope, I think we're good.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for listening. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
Definitely a longer one, but I feel like it went well.
Yeah, no, I think it went well too. I think I don't think we could have made that any shorter. Like I think if we would have split it up into two, it would have been weird.
Yeah, I think so too. And it does feel like it is a topic that warrants a lot of like time, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Is this what episode is this? 253?
Um I have it as 252,
Okay.
unless that's not right.
Oh, I see. No, you're right. Okay, so I forgot that I put the Dula episode. I put a folder in there just so I could keep track, and then I realized that we did. Okay.
Got it.
All right.
Whew. Um
Cool. Well, I will upload this now, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
Um,
That was fun. That was fun.
yeah, we were. I feel like we were an appropriate amount of snarky.
That's what I was hoping for. You know, I didn't get a lot of jokes in there, but I got a handful. Got to call Alex Jones all sorts of things.
Yeah, that was great. I love that. So maybe we'll get doxxed as a result of that. It'll be fun.
I would not have any problem being known as the podcast that was relentlessly went after Alex Jones and
Yeah,
then pissed
I'd be
people off
fine with
about it.
Yeah, I'd be fine with that.
Yeah.
So cool.
Well,
All right, I'll upload this now.
cool. Thank you.
No problem.
I'll go ahead and end this for Patreon people. Bye, Patreon people.
Bye, Patreon.
We have not done